I don't know if I agree with the story of Mr. Muddle. And it doesn't happen often, but every now and then in a Mr. Man or Little Miss book, there'll be a certain approach to solving a problem, and I think it's actually kind of detrimental. And that's maybe the case here. I think it depends on the individual child, but I'll talk about what I mean about that as we go through it. So, Mr. Muddle is a character who muddles everything up. I think there's an element of relatability there for some young children. For example, he puts his shoes on his hands. He hammers things in backwards. Not that children are going to be hammering nails. He puts his coat the wrong way around. I think that's a really great thing, that we're showing this character who doesn't always get things the right way around. And I think that can be really frustrating for young children, particularly if they are trying their best and they keep getting it wrong. Being like Mr. Muddle shows that that's not that uncommon, and that actually there are other people as well. And I can see the point of this. He starts to do things wrong. He goes fishing with George, and George gets frustrated because everything he does, he basically does not necessarily the opposite, but something that's misguided. Here he says, now let's fish. And in a bit, I love this. I just love the phrase, dropped himself over the side of the boat. I just love the way that's written. And George comes up with this idea of giving him incorrect directions. Which I can understand why. To show you an example, he says he wants the boat pushed back up the sea, up the sand, up the beach. And he says, help me push the boat out into the sea, knowing that Mr. Muddle will get it wrong. And he does, he pulls the boat back up to the beach. And George praises Mr. Muddle. But the problem with this is that George has just praised Mr. Muddle for misinterpreting directions. And that's reinforcing to Mr. Muddle that his actions were correct, and that's what he was asked to do. And that means that Mr. Muddle has just been told that in order to push a boat out to sea, you need to drag it up the sand. Now that's quite a complicated description. To try and make it a bit more simple, if you asked a child to put their shoes on, but you actually meant put your shoes in the cupboard, and that's what they did, they will now connect the phrase put your shoes on with the action of putting their shoes in the cupboard. And that's reinforcing that incorrect action with that statement. And obviously, as a one-off, you do have to kind of work with the child in order to get things done. But if you did this constantly, you're telling the child that the incorrect action that they've done is the correct thing. And that can be detrimental, particularly if it's long-term and not something that's corrected in other ways. I know sometimes it's an interim measure if it's obviously a serious problem and a child is in therapy for it, if they're doing play therapy or art therapy or something, then that's not so severe. But if you just have a child who gets muddled up and you start to reinforce that behaviour, that can be really detrimental, because the longer you reinforce it, the harder it's going to be to rectify. So I don't actually agree with this. I like the fact that he saw that Mr. Muddle needed help with instructions, and he did his best to help Mr. Muddle to do the right actions, but I think he was going about it the wrong way, and this is something that some other characters adopt as well. So actually, as I said, it doesn't happen often that I disagree with a Mr. Man book, but I honestly think it's giving the wrong message. And as I said, as a one-time thing, it's not going to cause that much harm. But if you keep reinforcing that behaviour, and if a child starts to think that in order to put your shoes on, you have to put them in the cupboard, it's going to be even more confusing when you say after 6 months, actually, I didn't mean that. That's not the action you should be doing. When I said that, I shouldn't have been reinforcing that behaviour. So it's actually not a great message. And it's a shame, because I do like the fact that it's saying, okay, some people just get muddled. You need to find a way to help them to understand what you're saying and what you're asking of them. But the way to do that is demonstrative, is to do it yourself and to repeatedly show the correct actions that go with the correct instructions. And over time, they will begin to grasp the correct things. So, nice idea. Honestly, pretty terrible execution.